How's it going, guys, and welcome to Borderlands 4. Before I get into things here, I do want to say I'm going to try my best to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, and the only gameplay I will be using in the background is that of the first vault in Septus. Aside from that, I'm going to try my best to keep spoilers out of anything else. But yeah, Borderlands 4, and we're here to start it out with a bang talking about math. Because as of maybe an hour ago, I, along with community member Dizzy, managed to put together what I am pretty confident is the damage formula for Borderlands 4, which I am pretty confident is the damage formula. However, it's still very early and this could change. If this does change, I will either unlist this video or I'll put some sort of update down in the description. However, I've done a lot of testing with this to confirm, and I am pretty confident that this is what the damage formula is currently looking like. That being said, this is also a very basic damage formula. This is going to be going over the kind of formula in general, not for a specific character. I'm kind of avoiding specific skills because there are some skills like Bloodshot that are a little bit different. As well, everything I'm going to be talking about here is specifically the gun damage formula. This isn't for ordinances or grenades or action skills or anything. Or again, anything that is specific to certain skills. I will probably save all that for a future video. However, I do believe that they probably all follow a similar suit. First off, let's take a look at this thing. I don't know who made this, but someone hurt them and it was with multiplication. Because, man, do we not have much. Yeah, pretty much our entire damage formula, all of our damage types, are in fact additive. But I'm sure a lot of you are still pretty confused, as this formula is pretty unintuitive looking. Although, honestly, once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. Mostly just the crit is weird. So let's break it down one by one. First off, of course, we have the base damage. This is your base damage of your gun, and already we have an issue. The base damage of your gun lies to you. This isn't a big lie, but it is a lie, and it does impact your formulas, and it does mean that most often when you are running calculations, unless you can actually determine the exact damage number of your weapon, your numbers will always be off within about a 1% error. This is because visually the number rounding within a variance of minus 0.3 to plus 0.7, which again really isn't a lot, but it does mean that sometimes your numbers will be off, so keep that in mind going forward. Along with card damage, I have also noticed that some of the damage passives on enhancements can also be off sometimes. Now we get to the very large additive section, this first one plus gun damage plus elemental damage plus damage dealt. These are your damage modifiers. Of course, gun damage applies to your guns, elemental damage applies to any elemental damage your guns deal, and damage dealt being just damage dealt, an overall damage modifier. And then splash damage applying if your gun deals splash damage. Whereas in Borderlands 3, if you're familiar with that formula, it was very multiplicative. These things used to multiply against each other, where you would have 1 plus gun damage times 1 plus elemental damage times 1 plus damage dealt. Here, it's just 1 plus all of your different damage modifiers. So say you had one source of 30% gun damage, a source of 20% elemental damage, and another source of 10% elemental damage, and 15% and 20% of damage dealt. This is what that section of that formula would look like. It would just all be added together. Now, where things get especially confusing is how crit is handled with this additive formula. So you get your damage dealing modifiers added together. You then add that to your crit section. The crit section starts with a 1 plus and then your card crit. Some people might not even know this, but there is actually on-card crit of guns. You just have to enter the inspect of it and you can see your on-card crit damage right here. This done here has 33%, which is what would be added to that initial 1 plus, that 33%. Now to mention here as well, this is another element that suffers from rounding. This does say 33%, but very likely this is like 33.33333% repeating or something. It is just rounding visually, so it doesn't say that. However, again, it is only rounding visually, and this is something that can make your numbers a little bit off. But from there, we add that to 2 times all of your crit skills, which also get added together in this section. Now, to really clarify exactly what's happening on this crit, because it is a little bit weird, and being as Borderlands 3 brained as I am, I got caught up on how we were multiplying our 2 multiplier directly by our crit skills, and ending up with higher crit damage. But that 2 is not actually our crit modifier, because everything is additive. The 1 at the start of this section is actually just the crit modifier. Since this entire section is still being added to the first section, we still have the 1 which represents the baseline of our base damage. So when you hit a crit, this secondary 1 gets added to that, and that is our 2 times modifier. The 2 is multiplied by our crit skills and is then how we are actually modifying that initial modifier outside of the card crit. If that is still confusing, I'm sorry, that's the best I can explain it. After that comes our two other multipliers, being amp damage, which does make amp damage quite strong, alongside the elemental multiplier depending on your effectiveness against an elemental type. So let's quickly see this in action. Here we have the Ruby's Grasp, which has a card damage of 501 with a card crit of 33%, of course, within our margin of error. I don't have anything on in my specializations, and within my stills, I have 15% weapon damage from Cold Iron. I will have a max of 37.5% damage dealt from Grave Fiends, 20% elemental damage from Elemental Essence, and up to 45% crit damage from Grave Sights. And then coming to our inventory, I have nothing equipped other than some guns, and this rep kit, which will come into play later. But with that, to activate my skills, I will summon some specters here, wait for them to die, which I won't make you guys watch, and after they're finished dying, I can hit a crit, and we hit 1883, which, looking at the value that we get when we plug in all of our numbers, isn't exact, but it is within the margin of error that we've kind of set up here. But of course, this isn't really testing everything. We've got our Bullet Sponge here set to armor, and I'm going to be hitting him with this Ephemeris, which has a damage of 452 and no on-card crit, but is going to be firing in radiation. Once again, I'll summon my specters and let them die so I can get my kill stills up. Hit a crit, and we get 820. Which, plugging in our numbers and applying the elemental effectiveness multiplier, gives us 819, definitely within our margin. Now we're going to change our Bullet Sponge back to Flesh so that we no longer have that multiplier. So now let's do this all again, except we'll throw Amp on there. Now my rep kit does also give me 25% splash damage on use, so we'll have to plug that in as well. But as my specters are about to run out, I'll pop my rep kit, take the shot, and I missed the number, but luckily the target dummy shows us that we had 5,259, which, taking a look at our output, we got 5,256.825, which is within our margin of error, and therefore why I'm so confident that this likely is the damage formula, as strange and obnoxious as it may be. That's gonna about do it for this one though. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. I'll be live right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel with Borderlands 4, which there will be a link to down in the description below. And just below that is a link to my Discord server if you want to come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.